Hello and welcome to another episode of Super Pump. Today, Akshay, we are discussing Ethereum Layer 2 solutions. But before we get into that, let's talk about Ethereum. You have a very specific idea of what Ethereum is. Why don't you take us through that?
Yeah, I figured we'll talk about Ethereum in a way that's not technical and that was attractive when I first understood it this way. So, what is Ethereum, right? It's a system that enforces property rights. That's the best way to think about this. You know, if you think about the Bitcoin, what is Bitcoin? It's basically, I think of it as an Excel spreadsheet where every row is a transaction, right? So you have a from address, you have a to address, and you have some amount of Bitcoin sent. That's it. But it's protected with all this decentralized infrastructure, right? But all it really is just a spreadsheet of who owns how much Bitcoin. That's it. With Ethereum, you can do something called smart contracts, which is a type of transaction where you can enforce law.
What do you mean by that?
What kind of law? Okay, let's talk about that. There is this axiom called code is law. And the idea is, what is law? Law is just a set of if X, then Y statements.
If you break traffic rules, you get fined this much. If you steal money, you go to jail. So if X, then Y.
All property rights, turns out, can be reduced into this as well. Ethereum is basically a settlement layer that allows you to create these kinds of contracts. For example, if you borrow money, with X as the collateral under the following X, A, X, B, X, C conditions, you can get, you can get a loan of under the following circumstances, right? So
Got it.
if you submit this much collateral, you can get this much loan.
Got it. So if X, then Y in this case.
If X, then Y. And so it's actually a way to enforce property rights on the internet, right? And that's why the idea of code is law is really powerful.
So law is essentially if X, then Y, and Ethereum is just a coded version of law, right? Like you can't dispute this. You can't dispute the code. The code exists and the contract will execute itself. And the contract executing itself is like the judge saying, hey, this has to happen because it's already coded. That's why you're saying Ethereum is code of law. Code is law.
Yes, exactly. So Ethereum is a way to enforce if X, then Y statements.
Got it.
For example, if there is a hurricane, then you must get paid out and it destroys your house, then you must get paid out Y amount of compensation.
Got it.
Once you create that, even the creator cannot stop it, right? Just like the law is applied to everyone equally, at least in theory, the idea is once you write up a smart contract which has if X, then Y statements, it's enforced by the system whether the creator likes it or not.
So what this essentially means is that we trust law in the real world, which is that, hey, if something unjust happens to me, I trust law that it will serve me justice. In this case, law is the code, so you trust the code to enforce whatever the promise that was made in the code.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. And that allows you to create predictability and build an entire system of property rights because you get what is called the rule of law, right? And if you look at stable jurisdictions around the world, they attract investors because they have rule of law.
Like America, people want to invest in America because they trust the law there. They trust that law will be enforced in America and justice will be served effectively in America.
Exactly, right? That's why if you invest in a factory in the US versus if you invest in a factory in a country in Africa where there is constant political turmoil, maybe there's a dictatorship versus a democracy, you're walking into a much more unpredictable environment because of which the same factory with the same output will be valued lesser. In fact, the question, it's an interesting question to ask. How valuable is the rule of law? Well, it turns out it's incredibly valuable. Rule of law accounts for nearly 50% of all wealth. There's a guy called Tom Bell who's written, who in his book called Your Next Government publishes this chart. This is the pie chart that represents the share of wealth of natural resources, right? Which is just 5%, of produced goods and services, of intangible foreign remittances, schooling, and eventually rule of law, which is about 44%. Right? Imagine you're in New York City and there's a hypothetical weapon called the law bomb, okay, where when the bomb goes off, all the laws disappear. Everything else stays the same. All the buildings stay, all the jobs, all the companies, everything stays.
But it's just a lawless land now.
but it's lawless. The only reason humans, I mean, we don't go around chaotically murdering and pillaging each other is because we have a way of ensuring property rights. We know this belongs to you, this belongs to me. That allows us to maintain a peaceful, collaborative society. The minute you pull out those assumptions, it's absolute anarchy.
Now you compare a place like America with a place which is more lawless, which is, courts aren't effective, places where justice isn't served effectively. So those places are less trusted and hence less monetarily valuable. This is why a factory in America, you are going to be willing to pay that much more money to have access to it because it's more predictable. And if some shit goes wrong, you will be fine because you trust the rule of law there. Got it. So Ethereum is code of law essentially makes Ethereum an extremely trustworthy country with an extremely high probability of law being enforced because it's a code.
And it's deterministic and it's open source, right? It's anybody can see it. So you can go open up the code as long as you understand it. You can review it. It's deterministic, which means there is if X, then Y is a deterministic piece of code. There's no room for ambiguity as long as X and Y are clearly defined, right? And because it's decentralized, it's self-executing, right? Which means nobody can stop it. So when you and I agree in peacetime, if we get into conflict, it doesn't matter how powerful you are. You can even be a country. My counterpart, I can just be like a small individual and you can be a country and you still can't stop the code, which in the real world is hard to find, right? If I'm more wealthier and more powerful, maybe I can get the cops, called on you. Maybe I can have the court system rigged. There are a lot of issues, right? So Ethereum creates a level playing field. Everybody, individuals, companies, countries are treated equally. So we link to this Bankless article, but the way to think about Bitcoin and Ethereum are actually to think of them as digital nations where you have citizens and certain types of rules are enforced in these digital nations, right? Because you're basically protecting property rights. On Bitcoin, the only form of property is Bitcoin itself, right? On Ethereum, you can have a variety of property rights because they just made property a variable instead of a hard-coded constant.
Smart contracts.
Smart contracts.
Yeah.
Right. Describing Ethereum this way helps make it easy for folks to understand. The most important use case that's being built on Ethereum right now is DeFi or decentralized finance, where you realize, everything that a bank does is some version of an if X then Y transaction.
Yeah. Why don't we decentralize all of it and put it on this chain? But the problem with Ethereum right now is that it's extremely congested, high network fees. So the average retail user finds it too expensive to transact multiple times, which right now we do with a bank. Making every payment is expensive. Right now we're trying to figure out how Ethereum can go from ETH 1.0 to 2.0, where this system becomes a lot more efficient. People can make more transactions, and something called layer 2 solutions, which is essentially a way to scale Ethereum so that transactions can happen quicker and for cheaper. And the way to do that is to create solutions for a layer 2 of Ethereum. Layer 1 is the main layer where all the settlements eventually happen. This is like, the mother blockchain. And layer 2 are all these different ways that other decentralized finance apps can interact with the main layer. And there was a fantastic article in Messari written by Mira Cristanto, who's one of Messari's top research analysts, which helped me understand what are the different solutions that are being used in order to scale Ethereum. So we thought, why don't we just get Mira to come on the show and explain the article that she wrote, which is super useful for folks like me and you who aren't really technical, but we can get an idea of how Ethereum is actually going to scale this. Just a quick note, folks, this video will get slightly complicated, but do try and watch it till the very end. I promise you that you will walk away with way more knowledge than you had before you got in. On that note, let's say hi to Mira. All right, Mira, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Mira, I must say that your article is the one that taught somebody absolutely new to this about what Ethereum is trying to do, with its layer 2 solutions. So Akshay and me were talking about how we should maybe turn this article that you wrote into a video, but then we became kind of lazy and we said, let's just call Meera and get her to do this. As opposed to doing the work for ourselves. So thank you so much for enabling our laziness, Meera.
Well, it's great to be here. And so, yeah, thanks so much for inviting me.
All right, so let's just get into it.
So, yeah, just getting started in terms of the Ethereum scaling solutions. I think that, this is something that has always been a key focus, even early days. So, for example, Vitalik here has said, we're going to die trying. And as Tanmay said, maybe you don't need to die, so we need you. But ever since 2014, he's already thought ahead, right? Not just like what happens in the first million number of users, but in the 100 million of users. I think what we've seen is that what Vitalik was concerned about became real, right? So obviously in the beginning of this year with the DeFi boom, transaction fees escalated. And what we saw is that it became really prohibitive for the regular retail investors to make a transaction.
Yeah,
so
it took me 12 hours for one transaction once, and it was still early days for me. So I remember panic calling Akshay saying, Akshay, it's over, my money is gone, there's just no way that this goes through now. Then eventually Akshay taught me how to use Etherscan and be like, just trust the process, it'll happen, Vitalik's on it.
Right, exactly. And so, yeah, and the problem is that, when you make a transaction, you have no idea what happens after.
Yeah.
You don't know. There's not a lot of visibility. So the user experience is actually not great. And if you're paying like $100, $200 per transaction, it kind of prices a lot of normal people out. And, this is especially bad because now from an era where you've got, just like maybe in 2015, like 20 apps building on Ethereum. Now you've got like 2,500 apps. You've got 50 billion locked up in Ethereum. So it really is really getting adoption. And now we're really thinking about, okay, what's next, right? How do we not make this user experience suck for the regular person? So really now we're going to enter the Ethereum scaling solutions.
All right, this is where the chart gets complicated. It was easy up till now, and now there's a flow chart.
Exactly. So, I think the idea is really that you are, you're basically just taking stuff, just decoupling really the execution, which is off chain, which is what we call like layer 2, from the data, right? Which becomes on chain once the execution and once the computation is done.
So just to be clear, layer 1 becomes like the final. Is it called the settlement layer, or layer 1 becomes like the main? This is like the main chain, right? So everything else, all the complicated stuff happens on layer 2, and then once everything's done, they're like, hey, are you ready now to come on the chain? They're like, cool, okay, now you can settle in on the chain.
Yeah, exactly. So when you take off execution and computation to layer 2, they can make it cheaper, they can make it faster, and then after like hundreds or thousands of transactions, they can just say, okay, let's just batch it together and then let's put it on the main chain. That's right.
Got it. That sounds simple enough. Cool.
Yeah.
You don't need to die to try to do this. This sounds easy. Come on.
And and when we look at this graph, everything above is a layer 2 solution. When we look below, we're looking at ETH 2.0, right? And that's sharding. And sharding is like in layer 1 in ETH 2.0 itself. So right now we need all these solutions, but hopefully in the future, Ethereum will have its own ability to scale.
Got it. So layer 1 is also upgrading to ETH 2.0, which will have the beacon chain and the sharding.
That's right. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. And we'll get to it later, but the first time I heard of sharding, it sounded really scary to me. Like, what is that? But really the clue is in the name. So sharding is basically like, if you could just think about like, different shards, like different highway roads going to the same place, all connected, all in one pipeline, really. But don't get worried about it. It's actually simpler than it sounds.
So what we have is layer 1, which is of Ethereum, which is pivoting to Ethereum 2.0. There's proof of work to proof of stake, and there's sharding. That's layer 1. Then you have all these different layer 2 solutions, which is what we are seeing right now, which is state channels, side chains, Validium, Plasma, child chains, and rollups. All of these will interact with the shards of layer 1. essentially, and that will eventually, that's what's happening, right?
So we don't have Ethereum sharding yet until ETH 2.0.
2.0.
So
Got it.
right now, ETH 1, which is what we have, like 1.x or 1, whatever you want to call it, it's still just one main chain.
Got it.
So right now, these layer 2 solutions, which is still early days, actually, to be honest, for layer 2 scaling solutions, it's still talking to the Ethereum 1.
Got it. But
Yeah.
eventually they're going to talk to the shard chains.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because Ethereum will be sharded in the future.
Got it. Awesome. Okay, that makes it very clear. Got it.
So this is the first type, which is kind of the most basic type. So what we would do, for example, I'll just use 3 of us as an example. So we would, for example, decide that, oh, hey guys, we do a lot of transactions between ourselves. So let's lock some funds between us so that we can do like a bunch of transactions between us.
We're just 3 gamblers. Okay.
Yeah, right. So we place a deposit really in a multi-sig contract, right? So
Got
a
it.
multi-sig contract is like, let's say there's 5 of us. Okay, 3 people or 4 people need to sign off to execute this, right?
Got it.
Or maybe just one person needs to sign off. Like
Got
depends on the threshold number. So let's say that every time one of us says a bad word, we've got to pay 1 cent to each other, right?
it.
So there's a lot of micropayments going on between each other. And once we're done, say, this is after 1 month, we submit the final result on chain. And then finally, only then the funds are unlocked, right? So this kind of sucks in terms of we have to like fix the number of participants early on. We have to lock our money up. But at the same time, this is the cheapest way. If we do have multiple transactions between us, this is the cheapest way to actually do that. Otherwise, you'd be paying like, we can't pay 1 cent to each other if our gas fees are like $20, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah,
we
this
can,
is-
but that would be very stupid.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Got it.
This is probably the simplest form of, everybody gets it. And this is very similar to like how Bitcoin's Lightning Network would operate.
Oh, cool.
So if I say a state channel in Ethereum, if I say a state channel in Bitcoin, this is exactly what people are talking about.
Are there any programs that are functional that use state channels today?
Yeah, so like Raiden Network is, similar to Bitcoin Lightning Network. There's Stellar Network as well. So Stellar focuses on state channel technology, but they also do sidechains, which we'll get to later. And those sidechains, are on Ethereum, Polkadot, and Neo. So these guys, they don't only work on Ethereum; they can work on multiple layer 1s. So there's multiple technologies and multiple projects working on kind of similar technologies.
But like you said, there are inherent problems in this, which is, the funds get unlocked later and whatnot. Do you see this being a widely used solution in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it does serve its purpose, right? So, for example, if we've got micropayments within a small group or within a set group, this is extremely powerful. But if we want to do smart contracts, it doesn't really support that. So it's got a very specific use case. What might happen in the future is that different technology offerings will coexist. Just because people might need certain like pros and cons, right? Some people who don't want their funds locked up, they won't use this. People who want smart contract, they won't use this. But people who just want like cheap micropayments, that's scalable to infinity, this is really great for them.
So Mira, I've actually heard people use a bunch of analogies, right? So for example, the analogy of a city, right? There's only limited space in a city and you're trying to pack as many people in the city as possible. That's kind of the problem. So what would I guess rollups would be a building. And we'll get to that, I guess. But like state channels is is there a way to analogize state channels, or is the city analogy just not relevant for this? Or do you think of it a certain way that's easy to?
Yeah, maybe it's kind of like a poker table. So when you're in a poker table, you sit down, you do a bunch of transactions between each other. And then when you're done, it's like, somebody takes a certain amount home and then and then people are done. So it's kind of like a tournament where, you make a bunch of transactions between each other, and then at the end of the day, you have a final state, so to speak.
You don't need to call the mayor up to bother him with, hey, listen, do you know what's happening at our poker table right now? That. So I like to think of Vitalik as the mayor, and the chain is like, the main organization that runs the city. Anyway, I'm in my own world. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, sounds
Awesome.
good. Before we perhaps go to roll-ups, I just want to just very quickly show that, there's this thing called like child chains, right? Obviously in India, Polygon Matic started off with Plasma child chains. So just really quickly, child chains are basically like a framework where you're copying the Ethereum blockchain. So you've got a child chain that's copying the Ethereum blockchain. Then you can have like great child and great-great-grandchild chains and so on. So you keep replicating the Ethereum blockchain. And you are, so it hasn't really been in favor anymore, this type of technology, because it requires a lot of monitoring, and it's also high touch. And also there's limited smart contract execution. And so, so basically, this is something that we can learn from, that, this space is really evolving.
I like how the Indians in the ecosystem came and created many children, much like the country. Like, our solution is to create many children.
Yeah. This is what, Matic had graduated to, which is a sidechain, right? So a sidechain is similar to what we saw, but a sidechain is really using a security of, say, that child chain. It is really a separate blockchain, right? And it doesn't have to be Ethereum, but in cases like Polygon Matic, it chooses to be running alongside and communicating with Ethereum. So it's got its own consensus mechanism, its own security guarantees. It's an entirely different blockchain. So how it works is like there's a two-way bridge. So the sidechain communicates with the main chain and then updates the state of the ledger.
Could you take us through this chart right here and explain it to me like I am a 5-year-old?
So the parent chain is Ethereum, right? And these
Correct.
basket of money or data is just bundles of data and represents blocks.
Got it.
So at a certain block, you deposit funds onto a bridge. So say, if we're using, again, like Matic as this example, Matic will have a bridge. You lock ETH, right? And then when you're done, you unlock the ETH.
Got it.
Also, ETH has a two-way peg with, the locked side chain token. In this case, for this example, would be like Matic. And so in Matic, in the light blue on the bottom, you can do whatever you want to do. You can, yield farm, stake, unstake, transact. And then when you're ready, you can swap your Matic back to ETH, and then you can unlock your funds
Got it.
in the Ethereum parent chain, right? Main chain, parent chain, same thing.
So if you had to put this in the city analogy, Akshay, let me try this, right? We would think of side chains as suburbs in the city that has its own thing going on, but they communicate with the city on a constant basis, right? So it's a separate chain which has its own token, which has its own tokenomics, etc., but it eventually it communicates with the main chain. Obviously, its security is not going to be as good as ETH because it's slightly smaller scale, and it has its own, there'll be fewer validators, I'm assuming. So there are some problems here, which is potential of it being slightly more centralized compared to ETH. But it makes things quicker and cheaper to interact with the layer 1 of Ethereum.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Awesome. 5 marks.
I mean, in some ways, this is similar to state channels, except it's got some smart contracting ability and has its own set of validators and a separate. I mean, basically, if you need to make smart contracts work outside of layer 1, then you need to have a separate chain. Have a separate consensus mechanism, right? Like we have all this stuff because we want to enable smart contract functionality. Do I have that right, or is that backwards?
So it's similar from the state channels in that it takes it off the main chain. So it dances around outside the main chain and then it comes back. But I would say if you're in the community of Ethereum scaling, people would say, oh, no, this is apples and oranges. These are very different. The difference would be like this has its own token. It's its own blockchain. So, for example, like, XDAI, Polygon, POA network, Liquid, Scale networks, these are all side chains. They can actually be friendly to any network, right? So if Polygon said tomorrow, hey, we're not going to be Ethereum friendly, we're going to be Tron friendly, they can completely pivot. We're going to be Neo friendly, they can completely pivot. It doesn't have to be Ethereum.
Got it.
Got it. But those functional differences of having its own chain, its own token, are all toward the end of enabling smart contracting ability. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
State channels would have limited smart contract capabilities. Rollups have smart contract capabilities, but we haven't gone to that one yet.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, cool. Maybe we can move on to rollups. So when people told me about rollups, when I first heard about it, I was like, oh man, I really don't understand. But it really is what it sounds like, right? Rolling up in this picture, just here's a bunch of transactions. I'm just going to roll it up to the main chain. So it's not like, don't be freaked out by the technical jargon. It's just bundling of transactions, summarizing it outside the layer one because it's cheaper and faster. And then once you're ready, you submit it to Ethereum.
Oh, it's literally rolled up.
Yeah. Yeah. You just like roll it up and you submit it.
Like
right?
a small little burritos being put on layer one. Awesome.
Yeah, that's right. So, Akshay, you said, you compared the last one to state channels. So this one, like unlike state channels, you stake the funds in an Ethereum smart contract. So all the transactions happen on layer two, and then they're only transacted on layer one if there's a dispute. How they do this is that if you're a bad actor, you staked your funds, right, on the smart contract. So if you are a bad actor and you're malicious and you're caught, your stake gets slashed, and the person who whistleblowed will receive that slash amount, right, as an incentive to call you out and keep the whole system running.
Nice.
Got it.
Awesome.
And in the rollup, where does the transaction, and the computation happen? Where does that computing come from?
So for example, Uniswap had said, oh, we're going to work with Optimism, right? So there's two types of rollups, optimistic rollups and then ZK rollups, so zero knowledge rollups. So let's talk about, say, the optimistic rollups. So Optimism and Uniswap are going to work together. It would all be on layer two. So all the computation is all on layer two on Optimism itself.
Okay, is that a separate chain, or how does
it's not a separate chain. I guess in some ways it's like a separate city or a separate, suburb. But it's not. I wouldn't say like it's trying to compete with Ethereum. It's just trying to be as compatible and as closely integrated with Ethereum as possible.
So rollups are essentially proof of transactions, right? Like these are validated transactions. It's almost like on a piece of paper, I write down, hey, these are the transactions happen, these are validated. And now I'm just going to essentially put that onto layer one.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different how optimistic rollups work versus how ZK rollups work.
Yeah.
So what you said, Tanmay, is like a ZK rollup. So these are validated and now it's going to be submitted. I can only submit something that's validated.
Got it.
Optimistic is different because, with the name, again, like the clue is in the name. Optimistic is because it optimistically assumes that the data is all correct, which helps the speed, right? Hey, guys, let's just put it in there. It's going to be fast. And then later, contestants or like participants can contest the data afterwards, right? So there's a 7-day like contest period or grace period, really.
Oh, cool. It's like, it's almost like Ethereum layer one is like, you don't want to wake this monster up. Like deal with all our stuff beforehand before it reaches here. I think all the different solutions so far are trying to not bother layer 1 in any way.
Yeah, that's right. Because every time you press approve on Ethereum, that's $100.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
when it's congested, it's like $200, $1,000. So yeah.
Yeah.
So try to do everything you can in groups, in batches, or outside layer 1 so that you only go to layer 1 when needed, right? So everything actually happens off chain. And then once it happens off chain, like you said, you submit a final invoice or single summarized transaction on Ethereum. So that's final. Fraud proof, of course, you do all this work beforehand. That means it's heavy on like a single node or single validator to do all this work, expensive as well. But it's lighter for the other nodes. So the fraud proof submissions are very expensive on layer 1. So we don't want to do it on Ethereum. We want to do it on layer 2. All the transactions, unlike Optimism, are 100% valid. So for ZK rollups.
Right.
Yeah, zero knowledge. I mean, we're actually going to do a primer on Zcash and ZK rollups and Zuko and all of it in the coming videos. So in case you feel a little lost, then just hit subscribe. You will know in just a couple of weeks what we're talking about in a lot more detail.
Yeah, that's right. So the Z is the same as Zcash, privacy coin. But instead of using it for privacy, the Z is used for efficiency in this case.
So it feels like different versions of a similar solution, right? Like these are all, would I be wrong in assuming that these rollups are created on a separate chain? And then just the method in which they communicate with the main layer is different in each one. Like here, the transactions are rolled up and then sent over to the main chain. Whereas in the previous example of side chains, every single transaction, it all feels like a bunch of transactions are bundled together and then communicated to the main layer.
That's right. Yeah. So even, when you think about it, like all layer 2s will all scaling solutions are exactly that, Tanmay. So even, for example, in optimistic rollups, right? There are nuances. I mean, for example, like Optimism is a type. Arbitrum is another type. Fuel Network is a type. Cartesi is a type. So there's like little nuances on how these guys differ. So for example, like for say Optimism versus Arbitrum, the difference is Arbitrum is about how rollups disputes are resolved. So for Arbitrum, they split up the dispute into small pieces until they resolve like that specific transaction on chain. While with Optimism, they re-execute on chain that one transaction there's a dispute about. So very similar, I would say for listeners. It might not make that much of a difference, but all these different projects have their own variations of the technology.
I think a cool thing about Ethereum or just blockchains in general compared to like companies, like if you made a comparison between protocols and companies, if Ethereum was a company, then you'd basically have a centralized product team that would look at all these solutions, pick one and work on it, right? Maybe they pick ZK rollups and work only on that and then ship that and then focus on the next thing. But the beauty of Ethereum is because it's open source, like all these teams can work on all these solutions at the same time. And then they all compete in real time for throughput and to submit to the chain. So I guess for now, at least Matic has won that race between all of them because a bunch of projects are moving to them. So I think it actually collapses the time in which you can get to market, right? So I know there's been the reason I say this is only because there's been so much criticism around how long ETH scaling took, and I think people have been talking about ETH 2.0 for so long. But even in the context of how delayed it's been, it would have probably been 4 or 5 times longer should it have been inside a company, right?
Correct. And it could have been wrong as well. Imagine picking something to ship and it just doesn't work.
So Mira, okay, so I know that a lot of folks are skeptical about ETH scaling and layer 2 stuff. For example, I saw an incredibly hilarious presentation by Udi on why Tron is the best network. Okay, I'm gonna try and capture that argument in the next 30 seconds, and I'd love to get your response and what do you think about this. So here's how it goes. It's basically, if you're using Tether on Ethereum, whether it's on layer 1 or layer 2, Tether is centralized, which means the Tether, the company, like the Tether you hold in your wallet, even if you hold it in an offline wallet, a hardware wallet, can be you can be censored, or that can be seized from you should the company tomorrow decide that they want to. And so even if you're interacting with Tether on layer 1, you don't have this decentralized censorship guaranteed form of money, because Tether, the company, is someone you have to trust in the process. And if you're choosing to trust a company in the process, you've kind of lost the decentralized nature of this. How would you respond to that, and how do you kind of think about that? USDC is also similar, right?
Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to say Udi is so funny. I know some people hate
He's
him because he's a
hilarious.
troll, but
Yeah.
he's so smart, right? And he's super smart, and he's just a troll. I mean, he can make arguments on both sides, and people take him seriously. So
He's a constructive troll.
yeah, exactly. And so, I think when you tell me that USDT is centralized and you have to rely on another, it's not trustless basically. That kind of reminds me of like Polygon or sidechains. Like these guys are not trustless. It's not like Ethereum, so their security might not be as great as Ethereum. And you really need to do the work to say, okay, do I trust this sidechain, right? I think Udi makes good points.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I guess the where I was going with this was, it's impossible to avoid trusting someone, right? You at least have a menu of options. I guess the best case for using Ethereum is you have for all these scaling solutions is you have a menu of options of who to trust, rather than making it completely trustless.
Yeah, I think the difference between say USDT versus say this menu of options is that all these menu of options has open source code. So you cannot say like, oh, this is like controlled by this player, or this is what's happening in the background, because it's just open source. You can see what's going on, and you can see exactly if you can or cannot trust it. So that would be the only difference, I would say. That with USDT, there's items in USDT that talk outside the blockchain. For example, like how do you secure USDT? How much money do they have in the bank? Whereas for smart contracts, it's all transparent.
So a lot of these scaling solutions will they will all see network effects, right? The more people trust one, the more likely more people are going to trust it further, which makes it really good for everybody who's already using it. So it all, like as of right now, it almost feels like there's a definitive first mover advantage. Anyone who finds the quickest way to interact with layer 1 with extremely limited fees has a clear advantage here.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a first mover advantage. Obviously, we've seen probably Optimism and Polygon as top of mind in people's when we look at say social media. But I think this is kind of like the point why projects can't just rely on VC funding, right? They need the community to back them up. And the only way to really do that is if you have a token, because people want to also participate. It's not good enough that some other VC benefits, right? Like people want to also benefit and rally around a token. So I think that's where Matic has also gone right, where they've issued a token.
Yeah, but the community is very good to have when everything is stonking. Right. Even yesterday, the conversation around Matic that I was seeing on my timeline was, whoa, the rest of the market bounced back by 30%, Matic's up by 100%. I was like, all right, but we're not talking about what they're releasing on 26th May. They're releasing the whole setup. And, it just feels like a lot of the conversation is around, the actual price and everyone's gains. But there's still so much more that's left to unpack when it comes to layer 2, right? Like sometimes... Now I have friends are so excited about Matic because they heard about it because it's making everybody money. And I'm like, who knows? Like Akshay and me talk about maybe ZK rollups is the right answer. We don't know yet. We don't know what the ideal way to scale Ethereum is.
Yeah, I mean, like if you think about Matic a year ago, they had that plasma chain, and people were like, forget Matic, they don't even know what they're doing and stuff. And so it all depends. But definitely, it helps to have a community rather than not have a community, because when times are tough, those people are going to rally, I guess, for the token. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like folks like Eric Wall have made a strong case for why Chainlink and its token is overvalued or whatever. But if you actually look at the Link Marines, they're like an intransigent community that has a very strong sense of an in-group and an out-group, and they have all these Chainlink memes and about making it, and they really held through the bear market to which is admirable, right? Like, and then so you marry that with strong tokenomics, like that's a it's just like it's just a much more powerful form of money than venture funding.
Yeah, I mean, no token, I would say, like gets it perfectly out of the gate, because like even like say Chainlink, right? They've got a very strong community, which is great. But at the same time, what's more important, the community or is it tokenomics? I would say like usage is more important. When you get a community, you can work on the tokenomics later. You can have the most perfect tokenomics, but nobody uses your token, it doesn't matter. And so I think that I think Eric's arguments are correct, but I think that all these tokens evolve so quickly, and that when you have a community and you have usage is really the focus for right now, at least.
So Mira, let's talk a little bit about like what the future could look like for Ethereum, assuming they get all this right, right?
Yeah.
What, like in 3 years from now, if I'm using an app, presumably a fintech app, actually, let me not put words in your mouth. So, what in 3 years from now, what do you think the average retail user can experience? What would be the Ethereum promise that they can actually experience today without $120 gas fees and waiting 12 hours where Tanmay calls me at 3 a.m. and absolutely loses his mind that his transaction hasn't gone through?
Yeah, so basically, like, what we've gone through was just a whole bunch of solutions. The problem is, like, none of the solutions talk to each other, right? Obviously, there's like Scale Networks, Matic. They're trying to build a scaling solution that's for every type of solution, and hopefully they talk to each other. But there are problems, for example, like, you need changes in user behavior, right? So if you want to use Matic, you need to learn, I need to learn a bridge. I need to learn like a wallet. So there's all this like education process. So what Ethereum is trying to do, obviously, migrating to Ethereum 2.0 would be like everybody talks to everybody. So everything is on chain, right? Instead of off chain, on chain, everything is on chain. And we talked about the user experience, but we also have to talk about the developer experience, right? Do developers want to deal with layer 2, cross layer 2 solutions? Do they want to deal with like security models and sidechains? Liquidity routing, right? If you think about liquidity being segregated on different, say state channel networks and different, sidechains, like, do developers want to work on that? And the idea is like, there's a little bit of friction. It's not that compelling. So the next step, obviously, for Ethereum is Ethereum 2.0. I think right now about 12% of ETH is locked up for ETH 2.0. So we'll get there, but it's still in progress. So sharding is basically just like breaking up, like I said, just like multi. In this example, it's 64-lane highway, right? Instead of a 1-lane highway, it's 64-lane highway. With the analogy would be like, instead of just one computer, it's like spreading computation and storage capacity across many servers.
And is there a reason why they picked 64 as the number of shards that they want to split into?
I'm not sure. For example, like in Polkadot, you could say that they shard as well with 100 parachains. But I think that what they do is that each shard, and just like Polkadot, each parachain would have its own specialty, right? So the governance structure is different. What it requires is different. And I think at a certain point, when you have too much overload for current technology, the network starts to degrade. So you can't have like 1,000 shards without network degradation. I think that has something to do with it, but I'm not sure why. For example, 100 is the magic number for Polkadot, or why 64 is the magic number for Ethereum. But yeah, I mean, in Ethereum, like each shard would have its independent state and transaction history, but the whole system is collective, right? It's not part of the main chain; it is the main chain. Like this whole thing is one main chain.
Got it.
Yeah.
So each shard chain is that
You're like, oh my god, so much information.
No, not at all. I asked for this. So each shard chain, would shard chain be an accurate word? Is shard chain a word?
Just say shard.
Yeah.
Each shard.
So each shard can have different transaction history. While, say, for example, shard number 64 has a bunch of different transactions on it. Shard number 63 has a bunch of different transactions on it. But they all talk to each other, and that's what the beacon chain does, which is makes sure that there's not the same transaction on multiple shards, et cetera, et cetera. So they're actually one big system, just split up into 64 different systems to help each scale. So now all these layer 2 solutions, they'll all be interacting with one of the shards?
So not sure like what would happen, but because ETH is sharded, then I think that, it would talk to one of the shards.
One of the shards.
We don't really know, like, shard number 2, this is what it looks like. Shard number 5, this is what it looks like. We don't know that. But, it would make sense that it would talk to one of the shards because the Ethereum would be sharded.
So let me try and explain this in my own dumb brain way, right? So ETH's moving to ETH 2.0. There's 3 parts to this. One, we're moving from proof of work to proof of stake. And there is the beacon chain. Then there is the shards. Instead of ETH being one chain, it's now 64 chains. And there's the beacon chain, which actually helps all the other shards talk to each other. So say Matic comes here with a bunch of transactions, right? And they're like, hey, listen, I want to put this on the main chain. And the beacon chain is like, cool, you can have shard number 62. Go there. And then Matic's like, cool, I'll go to shard 62. And then all these transactions are being put on this shard. The beacon chain is like, at the same time, the beacon chain is letting all the other shards know, hey guys, by the way, this thing is happening on 62. Just make sure that these transactions on shard 62, they don't double up anywhere. In case these guys try to get on all the other shards, just make sure that you don't. Am I semi-accurate?
I'm not sure 100% of what would happen in that case, right? Because like, let's say Matic has like a couple of different solutions, like what would happen, right? But I think that would be the case. And what would happen is that, shard number 62 would be like the DeFi shard. And Matic would be like, excuse me, that's my game, right? So I want to be there. So I think that is generally what would happen.
How insanely cool. I love it. It's so it like just imagining this happening is crazy. So I'm not entirely wrong. Since Mira is not entirely sure, it means that just by probability, I could be right.
And we're talking like not PhDs, but we're talking from a financial investor's perspective. Yeah.
Me and Vitalik, big brain, they're the same. You were saying something, Akshay?
No, I was just thinking of like one of the criticisms that Ethereum receives, partially fairly, partially unfairly, is that it's a Rube Goldberg machine, right? Which is that instead of just eating like this, why are you doing this thing? Right? Like why can't you just use Venmo if you want to transfer assets? And I think that comes from typically the Bitcoin stable or the decentralization stable, right? Where they're like, look, this is not decentralized. You're trusting all these, you're trusting Matic, or you're trusting, if you're using WBTC on Ethereum, then you're trusting some other protocol and things like this. But I think that what's exciting about this is if you discount the decentralization, and if you say, okay, I'm actually willing to trust, like, for example, I'm probably willing to trust Matic more than I'm willing to trust, bank in India. So it gives you, I think the optionality of who to trust is the most powerful thing, because if we can do that, tomorrow you can imagine an app where you basically have, it's just a fintech app, right? Maybe it's Cred, maybe it's one of the apps you already use. You just deposit money into it. And you get like an 8% yield automatically. In the background, it's settling on some layer 2 network that's super cheap. It doesn't matter. You don't care. You're already getting that. Maybe you have a bunch of NFTs in that same wallet. Maybe you have a bunch of like, productive DeFi assets in the same wallet. At some point, maybe NFTs start to represent real world assets with real estate. You have that in the same wallet. And so it's not actually about settlement anymore. It's just the ability to own your assets on your phone in a way that property law is enforced, even if it means that, okay, you're having to trust different parties from banks, because even today you're trusting a bank to enforce property laws. You're trusting, the local municipal corporation to keep your records of who owns what part of the property in your neighborhood safe. So you're trusting somebody. It's just that I think I would trust the Matic guys over like Bombay Municipal Corporation to, for example.
Okay, first of all, the Bombay Municipal Corporation is phenomenal. All right, like our cases, COVID cases have.
So Tanmay has about 16 FIRs, which is basically criminal complaints lodged against him. So now he's the biggest cheerleader for every government, any government in India. It doesn't matter whether it's local, state, or federal. He's a fan of all of them, right?
Mira, I'm not a criminal. I'm just a comedian in a conservative country, so that tends to happen.
You're like, RBI, we love you.
Big fan.
Reserve Bank. Oh, so
awesome. Was that
I think actually you're exactly right? So for example, here, where I am, if I want to send money to somewhere, it's like, well, excuse me, who are you sending it to, right? Oh, we can't do that. Oh, you want to buy a property? Oh, we're going to see your proof that you want to send your own money. Oh, and by the way, come back in 3 days. You got to sign this paper. Oh, the signature didn't match. Come back in 2 weeks again and sign again. It just doesn't work for a lot of people.
Mira, have you been to India? That sounds exactly like what happens here.
And it's not to any country. It just happens all over the world. It's so painful. And the best thing about crypto is that you're in charge of your money. The worst thing is you're in charge of your money. You lose it, that's on you. Maybe the municipal government can track it back if you lose your password, or any bank can regenerate your password for you. But at the same time, for crypto, there's pros and cons.
Yeah, it's still insane to me that if I don't remember 18 words, I'm poor. Right? Like if I don't remember my seed words, I'm gone. That's still crazy to me. I don't know how to. And every time I'm depositing more fiat, I'm turning more fiat into crypto. I'm like, better remember those damn words. Just make sure you don't forget them. Write it down in 10 different places. So it's scary. But
no, that's not how to secure it. Write it down in 10 different places.
I'm just writing it everywhere. Okay, I still need to get a separate. I still need to do the separate laptop. Never been connected to the internet thing. I still need to do that. Maybe when my portfolio is not entirely bleeding, I can buy another laptop.
Thanks, Tanmay. Now we know that we can go rob your house and we can find your laptop.
We haven't done the OPSEC episode with James Lop yet, so Tanmay's still like.
Awesome. Was that the last slide on the presentation?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, obviously, if you want to dive deep, you can always read the Messari report. But this is the non-PhD level of, what is important, I guess, in terms of layer 2 scaling solutions.
Mira, let me ask you something. What is the best and worst part of your job? Because you get to by the way, just for the folks who are watching, you should also go check out the Asia Crypto Report. In addition. On Messari, it's free. Am I right?
Yep,
yes,
that's right.
It's free, so you can download it. It has a roundup of all the action happening in crypto in Asia. It's one of the best. I'm a big fan of Mira's writing, and it's one of the best compiled research notes that's written on this subject. So I think people will really benefit from that.
We're gonna link it in the description, guys. You guys can check it out there.
Yeah, so basically, I think a lot of people, they don't really know what's happening outside their country. So they know, oh, in India, it's like this. Oh, in Hong Kong, it's like this. Oh, in Japan, it's like this. But, Japan doesn't know what Korea is doing. Singapore has no idea what Japan's doing. So this is kind of like, hey, guys, this is what happened with regulations. These are the top players. This is who went bankrupt. This is who got hacked. So, and then also just covering all the major players today. Yeah.
Cool. So what is the best and worst part of your job?
I think the best part is that I'm in crypto. So things happen so fast and it's 24 hours. And it's super exciting. And the worst part is that it's 24 hours and it's super exciting. So like I don't get any sleep. And I'm always on the computer, right? So I think all the Masari analysts complain that we're just getting fatter, and and we're just glued to our screens because we're so interested, we're so passionate about everything. And I love how the Masari analysts, like, no matter what token I say, no matter how new it is, like even if I've heard of it the first time, like somebody knows everything about it. So I just love that. Yeah.
There's a really cool. So the Masari analysts are obviously they're some of the best, most well researched analysts out there, right? So there's a really cool feature for folks to motivate folks to go sign up on Masari, and that feature is, of course, you get to see all the VCs, Tanmay.
Yeah.
So if you all the VCs you've heard of in crypto, you can go see their portfolios.
Yeah.
But what you can also do is go and see the portfolios of every Masari analyst. And the stuff they hold, right? Because they have researched I don't know if it's their portfolio or it's their recommendations, but at the beginning of the year, they put out their collection of projects that they think is going to do really well. But Mira, correct me if I'm
yeah. So basically, anything we hold, I think above maybe like 5% of our portfolio, we put on, and then anything that we keep our eye on, we put up as well. But to be honest, like we keep our eye out on stuff every day. So sometimes we don't think enough to update it. But the VCs, for sure, it's there. And sometimes the VCs get really excited. So if they make a new like investment, they're like, "Masari, you got to update this. Like, I made this new investment." So
this is for
I think-
everybody who asks me and Akshay what to buy. We are not the people. The work here has already been done. People are way more informed than us, and they are putting out what they're interested in. So you guys should 100% check this out.
Yeah, and you can go replicate the profile of a VC you think is good, right? I'm sure it's just a matter of time before somebody launches an enzyme.finance or token set, which is just replicates all of the Masari portfolios.
Yeah.
And for lazy people, you go buy one thing and then it buys 50 assets in the bag.
I'll buy that.
Akshay, I think that's your new business idea. Follow like Coinbase VC. Follow Paradigm VC.
Invest, actually, not just
Follow.
Yeah, invest. Yeah.
Coinbase tokens, just like you have DPI, you have.
Yeah. Mira, thank you so much for joining us. This was a pleasure, and there's just so much to learn. We're going to make the presentation available if you guys want to go more in depth and stare at the bags of money and really figure out where they're going from where to where. And we're going to link to Mira's article. You can follow her on Twitter. I've put the link in the pinned comment. Go say hi. Say India says hi.
Yeah, we're trying to convince Masari to focus their attention on India more than they already are. So go say hi.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mira.
And great work on the YouTube.